For years, video games gave you the same promise. A little number somewhere on the screen that told you how many times you could fail before the game was over. Traditionally, you start off with 3 lives, no problem. But then you lose one, and now you have to start paying attention. And then you lose another, and you're down to 1. And suddenly, the game feels completely different. Not because the game changed, because you did. On the surface, this system seems simple. You die, a number goes down, run out, and it's game over. But that counter didn't just track how many times you could fail. It made every mistake feel harder to escape. 3, then 2, then 1. The game didn't need to tell you that you're in trouble. You could feel it. With 3 lives, you can make a mistake and recover. With 1, you start carrying the weight of that last mistake before it ever happens. And here's something interesting that might surprise you. Even 3 wasn't always the magic number. That system was borrowed from pinball. For a huge chunk of pinball's history, it actually ran on 5 balls, not 3. 3 only became the standard once operators quietly cut it down, without cutting the price. Same quarter, less game. So even the number 3 has a little bit of a shrinkflation story behind it. Scarcity wasn't just inherited. Sometimes it was manufactured on purpose. Some games become harder because with fewer lives, you no longer play them in the same way. Let's zoom out for just a second, because this isn't just a video game thing. People understand a small number of chances instinctively. 3 strikes and you're out. A final attempt. 1 last shot. You don't need a rule book to feel the difference between plenty and almost none. There's actually research on this from 2 behavioral scientists whose names I'm not going to even try to pronounce. But they found that when people feel like they're running low on something, it doesn't just make them careful. It completely hijacks their focus. They call it tunneling. When a resource feels scarce enough, your brain narrows in on not losing what's left, at the expense of almost everything else around you. Now, that's not a game design trick. That's just what your brain does once the supply gets low enough to notice. The power isn't in the number 3 specifically. It's in being able to feel the supply running out. 1 chance can feel unfair. Unlimited chances feel too safe. A handful of chances lands in the sweet spot in between. If you're given multiple chances and you still fail, it makes it feel more personal. You reason you had time to recover, you had room to learn. So when the number reaches 0, it's easier to accept that it was probably your fault. So this is the part where you still believe you can prevent your own disaster. You start playing carefully, you hesitate, you avoid the unknown. You stop experimenting and start trying to control every variable you can reach. The enemy hasn't changed, the levels haven't changed, but you have, because you still think that caution can save your game. Now, this wasn't an accident of design. Shigeru Miyamoto has talked about exactly this kind of pressure. Not about lives specifically, but about what happens when failure sends you all the way back to the start. He said, "I think playing at that level of intensity is actually the most enjoyable way to play." Losing everything on purpose, as a feature. That sounds like a strange thing to design toward, but it's also exactly why it works. The risk of losing it all makes a game feel tense, and when you finally break through, it makes your achievement feel earned. A number of retro games even gave players a way to take that pressure down, with extra life codes, difficulty options, more continues. Maybe the most famous example of this is the Konami code included in the NES game Contra, which gave you 30 lives instead of 3. Because the real effect of limited lives was not just that you had fewer chances, it was that the same game started to look different when you were almost out of those chances. The game begins to feel different because every part of it now feels like it could take something away from you. One bad jump, one cheap hit, one mistake, and there goes all of your progress, all of your upgrades, all of your dignity. Those kind of stakes can make a tiny enemy feel threatening, a normal jump feel huge, and a familiar level feel hostile. The game feels harder without actually changing. On your last life, you're not just playing the level, you're protecting everything that got you there. When you're down to your last life, it makes every small part of a game feel like it has the power to take everything away from you. And that's pretty heavy, man. That is why games do not usually just give you one life, because one life feels cruel, but unlimited lives feels too safe. 3 gives you just enough room to learn from a mistake without enough room to ignore it. You could fail, you could recover, but you could never forget that eventually the game was going to ask you to stop making mistakes. And that was the real trick. 3 lives did not just make games harder, they made every chance feel like it actually mattered. And I think that's why being on your final life could make an ordinary game feel unforgettable. Not because the game itself changes, but because that number in the corner changes what failure and success means. When you finally beat a level or beat a game and you have nothing left, it didn't just feel like you had beaten that level or that game. It felt like you had actually earned it. Three lives. It was never just a number. It was a reminder that your chances were limited, that every mistake mattered a little more than the last one, and that eventually the game would stop asking whether you could keep going. It would ask whether you had learned enough to make your last chance count. So now I'm interested to know what you think. How many lives is enough? Is 3 the perfect number, or does that depend on the game itself? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, happy gaming, my friends.